Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Amanda Smithers, and I'm a member of the Early Career Researcher Committee for US HUPO, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. So thank you all so much for joining us. This is today's installment of our US HUPO ECR Committee webinar on transitions. We have two really fantastic speakers today, Dr. Melanie Juba from SciEx and Dr. Daniel Hornburg from SEER. These are leaders in proteomics, and I'm so excited to hear about their transitions from academia to industry. So today's webinar has a pretty simple format. We're going to ask Melanie to go ahead and start us off with a 20-minute presentation on her journey, followed by Daniel's, after which we're going to open it up for a 20-minute discussion where we'll be happy to field as many questions as you have. Please go ahead and put questions in the chat even as you come up with them, and I'll continue to monitor the chat so I can include those questions in our discussion at the end. So I'm really thrilled to introduce Dr. Melanie Juba. Melanie graduated with her PhD in chemistry and biochemistry from George Mason University, where she worked on physiochemical characterization and mass spectral identification of therapeutic proteins. To further her knowledge of mass spectrometry and other biological applications, she continued on to do a postdoc where she collaborated on projects with Johns Hopkins University, the Naval Research Laboratory, and the University of Virginia. Melanie has been part of SciEx for almost 9 years, where she's held a variety of roles across the organization. She currently leads the market development team focused on strategy developments and execution of regional marketing initiatives. So thank you, Melanie, for joining us today, and let's all give a big virtual welcome.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I really appreciate the introduction. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and we can get this kicked off. Are you able to see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, it was reached out to kind of share my journey today around transitioning from academia into industry. So I put together a few slides that's going to walk through my career path, how I've gotten to the role that I am currently in, as well as then some tips and tricks as you go through making your next or your first career decisions that I'm hoping can help as you transition. So where I'm going to start today is really around right after graduating with my undergrad. So I graduated with an undergrad in chemistry and started my career off at a company called Chemetrix. I was an R&D chemist focused on developing water analysis test kits. I really always loved science. I knew that's what I wanted to do as a career. And I figured being on the bench, being a chemist was exactly what I was going for. However, after a little bit of time, I realized that, water testing, I wasn't really passionate about it and wanted to find a way that I could take science, but really implement it into helping people. And so I did some soul searching, really dug into my scientific roots, read a lot of publications, and figured out that I wanted to be in the cancer development discovery space. So looking at what was coming out of companies like Amgen, Genentech, it was really big on biologics at the time. And so I decided that it was the right move for me to go back to school and get my PhD, focused more on the biochemistry side, honing in on proteins, mechanism of action, drug discovery, etc. So I got accepted into George Mason University and I delved right in. My background and my research was all done on antimicrobial peptides, looking at how we could leverage the innate immunity of some of the world's nastiest animals, Komodo dragons, crocodiles, snakes. I took that from as Amanda mentioned, a biophysical characterization perspective, but majority doing mass spec. So a lot of top, middle, down, and de novo sequencing of these proteins that I was hoping could then be utilized in some sort of therapeutic fashion further down the road. So over the next few years, I focused on, honing those skills and driving to graduation. After I graduated, I did a postdoc and then figured, teaching I enjoyed, but I really loved research. So I ended up getting an adjunct professorship at George Mason, and I really thought academia was where I was going to stay. I had, kind of gone down this path that I really was excited about. However, a few years later, I realized, all the peripherals that came along with academia that I wasn't 100% aware of. Although given the opportunity for flexibility, the aspects around grant writing, grading, internal politics, whining students just wasn't really what was motivating me anymore. So I started to look at jobs outside of academia that would allow me to utilize my expertise, my scientific background, but provide a new forum, right? Something new that I could strive for. So, luckily during grad school, I had really built a strong network by partnering and working with different labs, going to conferences, and connecting with different researchers throughout the field. So I started reaching out to them to see if they had any potential opportunities. I also started just applying to any job I thought was interesting. I'd probably applied to over 50 jobs and never heard back from any of them, right? When you're applying to jobs, you're just another resume in the pile. So, and I will say, grad school prepares you for a lot of things, right? Complex problem solving, having a really hard work ethic, effective communication. But what it does not prepare you for is job hunting. Oops, wrong way. Okay, was job hunting, right? And so what I needed some help on was really, how do we leverage your network? How do you craft your resume so it doesn't just sit there on top of piles, right? So luckily I was able to work with a couple of people that had gotten jobs in my lab and other labs. I knew a former Hunt lab member that had started a job at SciEx, and there was an open position at the company. I went through a series of interviews, culminating in an 8-hour in-person interview at the end. And luckily, throughout all of that, I got the job. So I moved cross country all the way to California from Virginia. And I started out there as the application scientist for proteomics and biopharma. I was in the lab doing method development, supporting customer samples, doing pre-sales with our sales team. And it was just a whole new lens for science for me, because it wasn't focused on one area trying to really understand and dig in. It was focused across a wide range of different experiments, different focus areas. And I thought that was really exciting. However, the toll of, being away from friends and family started to take it on myself, my husband. So I really took a critical look at what I was doing and what did I like about my role and what did I want to do next. So, the idea about talking and going outside of the lab, engaging with customers was really exciting to me. And luckily, there was a new opportunity that was being created within our sales organization for technical salespeople. So I was able to apply for that. And I not only got the job, but I was able to move back to the East Coast. So I moved back and I became what was called our market development specialist. So this was on the sales team. I was part of the sales team covering the Mid-Atlantic region. And one of the cool aspects about this was I was able to go back and forth into different customer labs, engaging with all different people, research, and not only focused on proteomics anymore, which is my background, but I got to live vicariously through them, doing small molecule analysis, lipidomics, metabolomics, all the different things that I hadn't really had visibility to before. So, understanding what they were doing, how they were doing it, why they were doing it was really exciting to me. But now I had gathered all of this information and, knew that I could also be impactful internally, helping drive new products. I knew what our customers wanted. I'd gained all this insight, but I wasn't sure how I could articulate that and put that into the business perspective. So I ended up going back and doing my executive MBA so that I could learn how to have an impact on the business side. Really, what is the strategy to drive growth, things like that. So once I finished that, I got a role in our business unit, managing our global biopharma accurate mass business. So that role, I was analyzing the market dynamics, gauging our customer insight, really helping craft our road mapping for products, launching products, really the ability to understand what it takes to produce instrumentation, software, total solutions to support the needs of our customers. While I was in that role, we ended up growing the biopharma business double digits. We launched 2 products and, really in a time where we hadn't really made an impact in that market. So it was really exciting to kind of see that transition and turnaround. But as I was in that role for a few years, I started to look back and say, okay, what are the skill sets that I've kind of collated over the years, but what am I still missing? And so I took a look and, how can I round out the acumen that I've developed? And there was a couple things that I needed to gain for my own personal achievement. And that was really around anything demand generation or outbound messaging, right? How do we communicate with our customers on the marketing side? I had never really been a part of that. Also, I've led projects, products, but I never was a direct team leader. So that actually helped me move into my current role where I manage our market development team, focused all in on the life sciences. And so in the current role, we focus on driving the commercial strategy and the creation and execution of outbound marketing messages to really drive interest, demand, and everything from a marketing perspective here at SciEx. So, I've highlighted in the green boxes, you can see below each one of these, really what I've been able to achieve and looking back and what those differentiated kind of skills that I've picked up in each role. I really highlight in each one of those. And I will say that's what keeps me motivated, right? And passionate about my career and the journey, even though that I've been off the bench, out of the lab for a little while, I'm still learning. It's this continuous learning that really helps me stay excited about what I'm doing with the focus of science, right? How can I be part of your science, right? The customer science without doing it myself. And what I will say is reflecting, knowing what you've learned and what you want to learn next is really how I've mapped my career path and my journey and has really helped me understand what next roles I should be looking at and moving into. So with that, I've also put together a few kind of tips that I've learned and I use as I make my decisions so that I'm hoping as you're going into your career decisions, whether it's your first job out of school or your next job that you're looking for, hopefully you can utilize some of these tips that I have here. So the first one I kind of alluded to in the career journey is really focus in what do you want to do next? Right? Select 2 or 3 things that you think will help elevate you in whatever your next goals are, right? Identifying the goals that you have and then articulating them not only to yourself, but to your manager, to your PI. Say, these are the things that I want to learn to bring me to the next level, right? And then you can focus on developing them now so that you're ready or what you're looking for in your next role. With that, it kind of goes hand in hand with number 2. When you are looking for that next role, make sure you're also interviewing who you'll be working with and who you'll be working for. And that's for 2 reasons. One, the people that you work with and that you work for may not have the same goals and objectives in that role that you have for yourself, right? So if you are reading a resume, or you're looking to apply for a role, and you think these are the things that are going to fulfill your needs and your goals for the next role, they may need to be aligned with that next manager and team, or else neither of you are going to be happy, right? And you won't be successful there. The second part is, let's be real, you spend more time with the people you work with than you do probably at home with your own family. So making sure that it's a really nice dynamic that you have with your team, with your boss, is critical. I will say, I've worked at SciEx going on 9 years now, and I love what we do. I love our products, but I really love the team. We have an amazing team, and they keep me excited to come to work. I enjoy working with them. So if you like the people you work with, you'll definitely have a higher level of engagement in what you do. Number 3, it takes a campaign of conversations. And what does that mean? It means that it's not a single conversation that you have, on an interview. It should be lots of conversations to understand what the role actually is from multiple people, what the industry that you're thinking about going into is like, right? Looking at people that you have networked with, people that you're interested in doing something similar, right? Articulating the desire to move somewhere or do something new to your peers and also to your manager, right? It's a lot of different conversations to find out where you want to go and how to get there. The fourth thing that I'll call out is around identifying your transferable skills, right? As I mentioned, you don't learn everything in grad school or in any one role, right? And so looking at the next role for you, you may not have those direct skills that they're calling out, but what have you done in your career, in your learning thus far, that can translate to you being successful with those skill sets, right? Just for an instance, let's say you're being asked to do potential pre-sales support at a vendor company. Let's say you want to come to a vendor. You may not have ever done that, but you've given presentations at conferences, you've maybe done a guest lecture, you've done other things that have allowed you to be able to hone the right topics, present effectively in front of people, right? These are transferable, translatable skills that can then be articulated into how you would be successful for something you've never done before. The fifth thing is really around creating a super strong network. And I'm not talking about a social network with how many people you have friends on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm talking about real trust building relationships throughout the industry and throughout your colleagues and your peers, right? The idea here is that you build these networks so that you get sponsorship when you're looking to move, whether that's into a new role, a new industry, or even move up in your current role. If I was talking to Amanda, I saw Daniel, applied for a role for me, and I saw that he had worked with Amanda. I would reach out to Amanda and I'd say, hey, I saw you worked with Daniel. What do you think about him? I trust Amanda, her opinion. So I'm going to now translate that trust more to Daniel and give him that opportunity, right? So creating those strong networks is really key. 6, don't do anything because you think you're supposed to, right? Earlier in my career, I went to school to do science on the bench, and I thought that's what I was supposed to do, but it wasn't what motivated me. It wasn't what I was passionate about. So don't make decisions based on what you think you're supposed to do. Really internally reflect and find out what is exciting to you and follow that path. And then lastly, always vote for yourself. And I can't stress this enough. Self-advocating is probably something everybody doesn't do enough, but there is nobody that cares about your career, your path more than you do. Now, there's lots of people that care to help and elevate and get you there, but if you need to be the one to own it, articulate it to them, whether that's your manager, your HR partner what it is that you want to do, and then work with them to get that done. But you really need to kind of take ownership of that, and as well as, really putting yourself first, especially in your own career development. And with that, that's kind of my tips as I've learned them over a few of my career journey. So with that, I will pass it back to Amanda, and we can move on to the next part of the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. That was fantastic. I had no idea that you had an MBA as well. I can't imagine going back to school again. But really fantastic. And I've seen some questions come into the chat, so please feel free to keep on adding the questions. And we're just going to bring that back after Daniel's presentation so we can all discuss together. So thank you again, Melanie.
Absolutely.
So
I'm trying to figure out how I can stop sharing. Sorry, guys.
No, you're totally fine.
All right. Let's see if I can figure this out.
So while we figure that out, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Daniel Hornburg. So Daniel did his PhD with Matthias Mann at the Max Planck Institute of Biochemistry, where he investigated proteome perturbations and neurodegenerative disorders such as ALS and Alzheimer's disease. He continued his postdoctoral research in Mann's lab, working with Felix Meisner on computational immunoproteomics, investigating the intricate communication network of immune cells and host pathogen interactions. He later joined Mike Snyder's laboratory at Stanford, working on multiomics, the development and integration of analytical and computational strategies for proteins, lipids, and metabolites. As vice president of proteomics at Seer, Daniel leads a cross-functional team developing and deploying transformative solutions for multiomics research at the intersection of bioinformatics, mass spectrometry, and nanotechnology. For this work, he actually received the HUPO Science and Technology Award for 2022. So please give a warm virtual welcome to Daniel. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you, Amanda, for this really nice introduction. And let me share my slides. And I have to say, this is a great event. I really love that. And one of my motivations to talk to you guys and share my experience is also that I always felt like when I was at every level of my career stage, I always felt like, oh, I should have known that. Actually would have been great to be aware of that particular fact, and that's something that I want to do a little bit differently, giving back and sharing my perspective. Now, importantly, this is also like just an anecdotal presentation of what I did. That doesn't mean it's the only way, right? That's not certainly the perfect way for everybody to go. So take that as like anecdotal evidence, like food for thoughts, and feel free to ask questions. So I will guide you through a couple of stages of my career, because I think if I look back, there are certain decisions, certain things that I thought are useful to know when you progress to the next stage, and decisions that you can make. So I will give you some anecdotes from my PhD and the time actually before that actually helped me still today, and then how it got me where I am right now. So I did my PhD at, I did my master's and bachelor's actually at the Technical University. Also was spending some time abroad at the Georgia Tech, now quite a few years ago. But I was always very interested in this cross-functional work. So combining like the pure biochemical training that I received studying molecular biotechnology, but also then looking into how can we create big data sets, how can we analyze the data that we are generating. So I was very early also working with mass spec data and molecular dynamics in introducing some of the computational biology aspects to my research work. And it was around that time that I also was very opportunistic in just trying to start my own startup. So with a couple of students, around 2009, we were applying for funding, for federal funding, seed funding for running our own startup. So what we did is we looked at extremophile organisms, like, for example, like this Clostridia, that some of which live like basically close to boiling water, essentially, and that under these harsh conditions, they do sometimes really crazy things. For example, they build these multi-enzyme complexes on their surface to degrade resilient substrates like basically cellulose and basically wood, right? So they are really capable of doing that, and that is facilitated by having these multi-enzyme complexes that almost act like molecular machineries. So we were taking those concepts and we were building like a biotechnical a multi-enzyme complex that would be able to really degrade resilient substrates to essentially derive bioethanol and biofuel from that. And that worked beautifully, actually. Like the papers and patents that we created were showing that it really works. The problem is, as a business, and that's what I learned at that time, it's not enough to just like get the science right. It's also like you need to hit the market with an offering that is competitive. And unless you're developing a medical solution for a disease, you have to be extremely competitive on the price. So the product worked, but it didn't get market traction. So that, unfortunately, as a business, didn't work out in the end. But certainly, like this early exposure to running a startup, building a team around that, thinking about how can we actually build something from the research on towards something that people are willing to pay for, was one of the early experiences that I really don't want to miss in my career. And as a student, you usually have time, right? And looking back, I would say like any additional year is spent on that was well invested, because during that time you have the flexibility. It's gonna get much harder as you move forward in your career to just take like a year to play around and try something. So then I started my PhD with Matthias Mann and Felix Meissner, working on neuroproteomics. So, I mean, many of you are probably familiar with Matthias. So he has a huge lab, like it's a really nice PI with a lot of like technologies around mass spec. So I was using that to investigate protein-centric diseases like neurodegeneration, looking at how protein aggregates actually drive toxicity in specific neurons. And at that time, I made a little bit of a transition towards like going more into the computational biology. I started out like the first year doing wet lab work and creating and generating huge data sets. And at that point, I was like considering like either like to just like outsource that analytical part of the research, or like to develop my own skills. And again, like something that you can do doing your PhD fairly easily is like to expand into new directions. And looking back, that is really something that enables me even to that date, that I spent like a couple of years to develop computational skills on top of the experimental skills that I had acquired during my undergrad studies. And that really changed the way I could look at data, the way that I could design experiments, because I knew I want to get a nice plot out of that is statistically sound. And later in my career, also engaged in more the machine learning aspects of data analytics. Now, there are a couple of things that I would say are really important during your PhD phase. First of all, like select good mentors and find good enablers and build like great friendships. And I'm calling out these three levels because they are not the same. Like PI might be a great mentor, right? It's someone who you look back and say like, oh, this scientific trait, I really like learned from that person. But they are not necessarily a great enabler. Sometimes these people are one person, but not always. An enabler is someone who opens doors for you. It's someone who will be like, it's a well-connected person that knows a lot of people and that basically promotes you for your next steps of your career. And sometimes you find these characteristics in one person, sometimes not, but you need all of those throughout your career. And friends are people that build your network. These are people that you can work on together, like in a very trusting relationship as a professional. And those people will really be key to your success as well as like your happiness overall. I also think, and I mentioned that before, that during your PhD, you have the freedom to really explore new directions, and you should use that freedom. I've seen a lot of students that think that time is really important, but in the end, if I now look at CVs for people that apply, like someone who just has been quick is actually less interesting than someone who like did a meaningful sidestep, like explored something new, like add something that stands out in comparison to other CVs and resumes. And one important part that I think is always good for startup PhDs, you will have multiple phases, right? There is a phase, the initial excitement about your project. You think, yes, I will change the world. And then you're hit with reality after the first year or so, like nothing really works out. And where should I be? And then it doesn't really make sense. But this is a natural growth doing your PhD, because you get better and better, even if you don't realize it initially, in making good decisions based on new data that is coming in terms of like your project development. And that usually means that the last 1 or 2 years of your PhD will be the most productive. And that's also something that you can then funnel into a postdoc, like finishing up projects if you desire to do so. So that going to the postdoc level that I did, and I just want to share a few thoughts around that, because it is really an opportunity again to do something new, to also change countries. And I guess like we have audience around the world. So if you really want to make a change in your life, the postdoc phase is not a bad thing to consider for that. You're probably still early in your career. You might not have a family yet, which make things more complicated in order to just switch continents. So during that time, I decided to go to the Silicon Valley, or like at least change continents. So I interviewed at the East and West Coast for postdoc positions. I decided then to go to the Silicon Valley. For everyone who is not familiar with that, that's a crazy area around Stanford, like south of San Francisco, where basically entrepreneurial spirit meets the academic spirit, and it's a really vibrant place. And I joined Mike Snyder's lab, where I expanded from the pure mass spec proteome-centric research to more the multiomics. So Mike is a great PI. He literally measures everything you can measure about the human on itself, and then passes on the data to his postdocs. So we know a lot about Mike Snyder's lifestyle and publish on that. So if you're interested in, it's a really, really fun and very Silicon Valley typical research environment where you can fully explore whatever you're curious about. And I was doing the lipidomics in his lab, as well as some of the multiomics integration from the computational side. One of the key projects that we recently published was a very Theranos-like project. We took a drop of blood and we did a complete multiomics profiling on in a very tight longitudinal sampling of Mike Snyder over a week, and that allowed us to see a lot of interesting molecular changes in association with his lifestyle and wearable data and all of that. And those things are really new directions you can explore as a postdoc. But again, like, choose a good PI. This is really something that is like the most important thing in selecting the next step. You don't have to go with a tough PI that may be famous, but that is maybe not a good like mentor, or not a good person, not a good manager, because you find actually it's sometimes hard to find them, but you can find great PIs with a great scientific standing, but also like that are just really good human beings that you look back, they will continue to support you, and that's going to be a door opener throughout your entire career. The question of whether to go for a postdoc or not, especially if you're considering academia, it actually depends. If you're considering industry, it actually depends on where you are. For example, in Europe and Germany, going for a postdoc, if you want to go to industry, might be seen as a little bit of a waste of time, because, and that is linked to the way the German system works, where people usually go through a master's, they start their PhD, not going to courses, but they really start day one research activities. So they are very independent as they start their PhD, because they have this additional master requirement usually. Now, that means if you are a postdoc and you are in the German job market, people actually say like, oh, well, maybe that person tried academia, but it didn't succeed. So they now decide to try the industry direction. It's, from my perspective, different in the US, where postdoc is actually seen as a benefit if you want to go to industry. So you have to calibrate yourself a little bit to where you want to be in your next career step, which country, which continent you are working in. So again, reach out to your network, learn about how people look at certain career decisions, make up your own mind, but also follow your heart in what excites you. And that was the reason why I went to Stanford, because this was such a beautiful place where this mix of entrepreneurial mindset meets the academic curiosity. And yeah, I was playing around during that time, where like, should I go again for my own startup, or should I just join like a Silicon Valley startup? And that's actually then what happened. Like 2 years later, ECR hired me, which was by then, like during that time, a very small startup. We were having a single office, like without windows, like just a glass door. So that was like an indirect window, I would say. But it was pretty much a typical Silicon Valley, like people getting together in a room and trying to build something new. And just like, so that you know what roughly we're doing, like we build proteomics technologies to really get deep into the plasma proteome. I have only like 2 slides on that, so but it links pretty much like to what excites me about also the startup life. So what we do is we try to get technologies built that get super deep into the plasma proteome, which has this tremendously challenging dynamic range, and for that reason, a lot of the potential biomarkers have not been discovered yet. And part of the reason for that is that it's really hard to combine depths of insights and a scalable survey of that complex biosample, as many of you are probably very familiar with. And what we do build at SEER are nanoparticles is essentially compress the complexity of an entire lab to the surface of that particle, assembling the so-called protein coronas. And my team is working on this cross-functional research, like understanding how and why proteins and other biomolecules bind to the surface of functionalized nanoparticles, and how can we design new particles to do an even better job in compressing that dynamic range in the proteome to something that is more digestible, more manageable to any mass spec downstream detector. Now, at SEER, I had multiple positions when I started. It was a very small company. I think they started interviewing me when there were around 15 people, and then I joined it as employee number 31, starting as an individual contributor. And then as the company grew, I had a lot of opportunities to grow myself to the point where I'm now leading a research group as a VP of proteomics. And this is one very important consideration you have to make when you want to switch to industry, a small startup or like rather a big company. There are some fundamental differences that I try to highlight here. For example, hierarchies. I think hierarchies in industry are generally important because it is way more about the efficiency of teams. If you have an academic group with like 50 postdocs, there's no way the PI can really take care like of everybody else, right? And in fact, there are studies that show, like, if you are a manager and you have more than 5 direct reports, so people you are responsible for in terms of what they do and how they grow as a scientist and as a human being, this is the maximum you should go for. Below that, you need hierarchies, you need different levels of responsibilities. And that doesn't mean that there's a lot of like, oh, I don't talk to that person because that person has a high level. It's really about like having capacity to take care of the science and take care of the people, which is a way stronger focus in the industry, and something that academia unfortunately often lacks behind, because it's like people are cheaper, and that's just a sad truth, right? So it's kind of like they are easier to be exploited sometimes, and it way more depends on, do you have a good PI that comes in with the right mindset, and then you are lucky, but that's not always the case. Another difference is like, how are the companies, like if you want to move forward in your career, a small company gives you the opportunity that you can move up not only by people above you moving up, but you are branching out, right? You're doubling perhaps every year. And that's what happened at SEER at the initial phases. We're essentially doubling the number of employees every year, and there were new new branches, new directions, new fields that were opening. And then as you grow with the company, you can actually sidestep, which makes it much easier to progress rapidly in your career. Another very important aspect of small companies is, especially in the startup phase, is you wear many hats, right? You might be a scientist, but then you are called into an investor call because you're also like the only scientist that knows about a certain area of your research. So the number of years you have spent in industry matter a little bit less than they do matter in big companies. And that gives you as a person a lot of exposure to other business related questions. And it comes with a very steep learning and a lot of what we call fire drills, where if there's an important investor meeting on Monday, you probably meet on during the weekend to get the slide deck done, and you rehearse everything on a Sunday evening. So this is kind of the balance between, I would say, like the flexibility you have in terms of like what you can do, but also what is expected of you, and that translates to a lot of sprints, like phases where you really have to all hands on deck. The entire team has to work on something that is really, really urgent. Startups usually have money, but they don't have time. That is, at least in Silicon Valley, often the case. There are some perks like free food, which is really great. You want to balance that with like some gyms on the campus. Otherwise, that's a dangerous combination. But I think the beauty of being in a startup is really you're building something completely new, and your contribution is significant because there are only a few people in that company. So whatever you do, you will have a major share of what comes out of that. And I really enjoyed that. I want to finish, and then I'm looking forward, of course, to the discussion, but just to give you a few more thoughts around like how to get prepared for a career in industry. I think you have to plan ahead because it can take some time. For example, like one of the most important things you should start setting up as you would consider to move to industry is a LinkedIn account, because this is a professional network where recruiters start to get like to recognize you, where you build your network, where you maintain your network, where you share like your career progress. And quite frankly, if you're at the postdoc level and there are no recruiters reaching out to you yet, I think there's a good chance that you could revise your LinkedIn profile a little bit. And it is actually a good exercise because it helps you to basically craft your own unique story, which not only is important for telling it to other people to get them excited and figure out whether you are a good fit, a mutual fit for that position, but also it forces you to think about, what do I actually like about the things that I'm doing? What do I like about the things that I want to do? And is it a consistent story that feels just good for me? I think that process is really something that is not only attaching a label to you and giving you like associating some nice shiny words, but it really helps you to figure out what you really want. Does it feel right the way that my LinkedIn profile looks and the aspirations that I'm expressing there? You want to write it in a way that it kind of speaks to your future too, right? The other very important thing is get training. I mean, this is so common, right? Like we learn the entire time. We always would get prepared for a presentation at a conference. But the same holds true when you do your first interviews. You don't want to see your dream job at Google or Calico, and then it is the first time you speak to a recruiter. It's the first time you talk to an HR person, because I mean you don't have the skills and the training to get out of that interaction with like the best possible outcome. You want to test yourself before, right? So get engaged, answer some recruiters, like have some discussions. And the added benefit is whenever you make a decision, you essentially base that decision on a lot of data that you acquired throughout that training process. You don't feel like, oh, maybe I should have interviewed more. And quite frankly, I even tell that to people that they're interviewing for my team. It's like I want you to feel like this is the best fit possible. So yeah, of course, like I don't want that to be your first interview. Like consider other options. And if you still think we can offer the best for your future career, I think this is the best mutual fit that we could be looking for. And then, of course, like add some data to like talk to your network, talk to your mentors and enablers, figure out whether they can make this important call or write this introductory email. Figure out what the salary ranges are that people ask, that people can expect in that field. Because again, like coming from academia, you're probably not calibrated to what it means to be in industry, what are the perks and benefits. It's not only base salary, it is actually also about like holidays and retirement funds and all of that. And if you're the first time in the interview, they ask you, what are your expectations for a base salary? You want to have an idea, right? You want to know roughly where you can land given your expertise. And with that, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you again. And I think the main message is like, follow what keeps you curious, follow what keeps you excited, because that's going to be the motivation and the engine, and actually like something that makes you very attractive for people that want to work with you, because they see that you are excited and that makes them excited. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I think I'm going to put, invest in yourself to build the foundation of your future just across my desk. Something to think about every day. And that was really great. So I want to remind everybody, we can go ahead and add to the questions in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and start us off with some questions. And so the first question's for Melanie. So you talked about the 3 main positions within SciEx. And so did you experience different kinds of stress during those roles? And which one did you feel like maybe was the most stressful? And it'd be great if you could compare that to your experience in academia as well.
Yeah, so good question. And I will say, yes, every role has come with its different stressors. I actually think Daniel pointed that out in his different career path and journeys that he took. I will definitely say the first role that I took within SciEx coming out of academia was probably the toughest. And the reason being is you're now working on someone else's schedule, right? Trying to deliver on-time results. You don't have the flexibility that you had in academia to really optimize, hone in, dig deeper, right? And really understand everything because you have a sample set that needs to have a result out on this date, right, to make a decision. And so trying to understand that nothing's going to be perfect and looking at what you can do to get things as good as you can in the time frame you have was probably the biggest stressor for me because I was a perfectionist, right? I knew that I could squeeze out a couple more protein IDs, right? Let me try some new columns or let me try something different for this method. You just don't have that luxury, right? To do that from a time perspective in industry that you do in academia. I will also say moving from the bench into that next role into the sales team. Actually, it was maybe less of a stressor as it was maybe like an identity crisis, right? So I had gone to school for, 27, 28 years. And now I'm going to not be on the bench where I thought that's what I was going to do with my life. Am I abandoning my scientific integrity, right? What am I doing? And so that was probably a real stressor for me to say, am I making the right choice? And, I think what we forget sometimes is you can try something and if you don't like it, you can go back, right? You can't get that time back, but you could always go back into the lab. I have a lot of friends, colleagues that have done that. And so that for me was a stress on its own because when you're part of a sales team, people don't look at you and engage you the same way as when you were the scientist on the bench, right? So trying to manage those dynamics for me in that role was really tough. And then I think for the next role going into the business unit, again, if you were to ask me what I do, I tell everybody I'm a scientist. Am I? Yes, I am. I feel very passionate about that, even though I now lead a marketing team, right? It's where my heart is. It's what I love to do. It's why I'm still in this industry. And then coming in as on the business side, now being seen as a business leader, right? And making more strategic decisions, things like that. I will say though, being part of a scientific company, it gives you a leg up because a lot of the people that you're working with don't have that level of understanding and expertise in why a customer is going to buy your product. I've been there, I've used it, I've done it. So Daniel was saying, he was brought into conversations that, because he's the one with the expertise. And instead of being brought into that conversation, now I was the one helping craft those conversations. So yeah, I think there's definitely things that you can say stressed me out. And academia, I will say, gives you more freedom, flexibility, time. But I also love a challenge. And so I will definitely say industry has stressed me in the right way.
That's fantastic. And similarly, Daniel, I'd be interested to hear, how has your stress at work changed from being employee number 33, did you say, or 31?
32, I think.
32, yeah. Sorry, I'm in the middle. To how many employees does Seer have now?
Is that his thinking face or a frozen face?
Yeah, I think we froze.
180, I think roughly, like give or take. Oh no, I'm back. I'm back.
There you go.
Okay, so 180, give or take, we are now. So what's right? Well, it changes. Like the thing about a small company is really like it's a different company every year, and the reasons why it is intense is changing. Right now, like it feels like we are at a transition where we are too big for everybody to be in every single meeting, but they used to be. So that's almost like it's hard to manage sometimes to still like have enough bandwidth and cross-functional communication while basically having like not everyone sitting in meetings every day. So that can be stressful, of course. Like before we went IPO, which we did a little bit more than a year ago, it was very stressful to get prepared for that. I mean, it's literally like we spent nights and days figuring out how to position ourselves, all the legal requirements, where like the science meets the legal. That's actually not easy to sort through, having these different domains to be combined. And then one thing that I actually underestimated is as you start being responsible for people in your team and as a scientific manager, that takes quite some energy. Quite frankly, like if people can be unhappy, and sometimes these are reasons that you cannot do anything about, and you still have to manage that. You have to help them to make the best out of their time. They need to stay motivated, because otherwise it's not fun. It's not good for them. And my thinking around that is always, I want to build a team that I feel I could always team up again, right? Whether they decide in the future to take a different career path, but I want to further grow that network. But it takes quite some time and energy and investment. And I would say emotionally, probably having that responsibility is one of the biggest stress factors. It's often good, right? Often you're like, it's great, right? If everything works out, but if people are unhappy, that can really affect you a lot. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. I think you both kind of pinged into that people management and how it's such a tough thing to not really get trained on that. But it seems both of you have reached a level where that's a very large part of your job. So we have a question in the chat about that compensation talk.
Mhm.
Particularly if we're looking at a startup. So, there's not a whole lot of people to ask, and interview about what their compensation's like. How should you consider those conversations, and especially that kind of discussion on equity incentive?
Yeah, it is very complicated, and it massively depends where the startup is. There's some legal requirement in California, for example. I think it's like they are not allowed to ask for your current compensation and stuff like that. The best thing that you can do is get some data. If you know people in that industry, in that area, talk to them, figure out what is a base salary, for example. It's a good starting point. Then also, like the whole idea about equity in startups, of course, that can be a big chunk of the potential benefit, is getting like early stocks, because those are worth not a lot until the company goes IPO, but if it does, like it can be worth a lot. But it depends a lot. Like it's very different in Germany, for example, than it is in the Silicon Valley. So my recommendation is like figure out who's already in that area and talk to that person directly. And you will some people are very open to that. You might even get like very specific numbers. Open Glassdoor and all of that can be a guide, but you have to be cautious. Sometimes they are very off. Actually, there's a recent development, I think in California by law, they need to reveal like salary ranges, which is actually a good way to calibrate yourself towards what to expect, what to ask for. And then, assume you need to negotiate, right? It's always like there's always wiggle room. In academia, that usually never happens, but in industry, well, you need to balance. Like you need to perhaps push a little bit back, and sometimes there's some wiggle room. You might want to have a little bit more vacation days, or like the more flexibility in terms of working remotely. Depending on the company, you might be able to set your own priorities and get more flexibility out of that. But yeah, the best thing you can do is talk to someone who is active in that area, because that person will give you more clear data.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Melanie, I'd be interested, you've taken all of these different roles in SciEx, and as you've gained responsibilities, like what's your kind of frame of mind when you go in to negotiate that increase in responsibilities and hopefully those increase in benefits, salary, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say negotiation is key. I will say you are probably more value to somebody in industry than they are to you. I will just put it to you that way. So right now, I'm hiring, and it is resource limited right now. And by resource limited, it's the right people with the right level of expertise is on a short leash right now. And so also being able to get somebody in, get them up to speed is something critical. So know your value, know your worth. Like Daniel said, go out, do some research, create that network, talk to people in the industry. What are the average salaries? But come in knowing what you're worth, and make sure though that you articulate why that is, right? Whether you have the exact skills they're looking for, you're identifying those transferable skills, right? To show what those are. But yeah, know what you're worth and don't settle for less. So I will say in my own career path, I've done the same, right? I said, this is what I want to do next. I've put a development plan together. I've executed on that. And when I'm going for a role, I say, this is why I want this level of compensation, right? And it's a fine balance between the hiring manager and the HR team, right? Of what you'll end up getting. But I think they also expect you to negotiate because they want to see that you really are invested in yourself and getting as much as you can out of the role.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And so a question kind of following up on that for both of you is, I know networking is so important, but particular grad students like myself who had to go through 2020 and a lot of that, some of us, our networks aren't quite as large as we'd hope right now. So what for you, that resume on top of the pile, what makes you stop and really look at it and not just kind of like, oh, this is just another general proteomics type resume?
Oh yeah, good question. I think like two things jump to my mind. Like when I briefly alluded to that, if it's not a standard resume, that I mean, it needs to be high quality for sure, right? But it should also not be just a laundry list of like 6 pages. If I see someone just finishing a PhD and they have a 10 pages resume, that means like that it's not something you don't have time to go through. Really, it's not your job to figure out perhaps why that person is useful, but a person needs to advocate, like build a good narrative, like a good story about themselves, why it's a great fit, because time is limiting for the hiring manager and even HR. Like we don't have time to go through 100 resumes, and that's just a matter of fact, right? Something that stands out is like something that's concise, something that is high quality, speaks to the role, but also is like slightly different, has like perhaps that person spent some time abroad or like tried their own startup. Those things speak out to me. And then one other important thing is, again, like if I get a call from a colleague or like a good friend, they're like, this person is looking for a job, I work with that person and that person is just great. This already puts it on top. I will really consider that person because like it's trust, right? Like, I mean, like those are relations that like, I would never recommend someone that is just like average to someone that is part of my network, because it is something that you only do once and then basically you lose that trust. So this is, I would say, the easiest way to get there. But otherwise, like, just have something. What's the unique aspect of why you are a good fit? Ask yourself that and put that into the writing, into the cover letter.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Daniel. And maybe I'll add a few more things. I think the executive summary that's specific to that role at the top is really key. Like, what are the 3 bullet points that why you are a good fit for the job description that you've read, right? Every job description I put together has a list of critical, functions that you need to have. You should list those out, why you have them, why you're relevant for this role. And so it should be personalized. You shouldn't just have a set resume that you send to 100 people. I've done that. It doesn't work for myself. And now reading resumes, hiring people, I understand why, because you haven't taken the time to adapt it to that role specifically. And then I agree. Reach out. So I'm a hiring manager on LinkedIn. I put, I'm hiring, right? Reach out to me, direct message me, say, hey, I'm interested in this role. Let's set up some time, because now we are starting to have a relationship, right? You're making those connections. So when your resume comes in, I'm like, oh, I remember this person. Even if we don't meet, I at least know your name. I remember your name. And so I'll take a more detailed look, right? So like Daniel said, I get 100, 200 resumes. If you can separate yourself from the rest of the group through different ways like that, I would definitely recommend doing that. Or if you know somebody that's in my network, have them reach out to me, right? Building that level of trust is really good.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think, one of the really fantastic things that's being highlighted a lot is this kind of intersection between your academic and the world of biotech. So some people might go into grad school knowing that they want to maybe start a startup and just get those skills. So are there any kind of, advice you might give somebody on picking a PI or how you even navigate that tech transfer type situation of going from your PhD to a startup situation?
Yeah, I think it's like you should be strategic about that. There are certain PIs that are very, very like closer to industry, right? I would say Matthias Mann Lab, for example, like having a very good technology allows you to build on top of that. If you are in a biology focused lab where it's like a very specific biology, like your options are a little bit lower, but you look at what people did usually in those labs. Like, are there a lot of startups? Is that PI a co-founder? Like, do they have a track record of spinning out companies? If that's the case, there's a good chance that this PI enables people to do that and has like the right network. If that never happened in that lab, it's probably hard to be the first one. So basically look at the data that's available, like talk to that PI, be open about that. I was sometimes feeling a little bit ashamed, like to say, like, maybe I'm not seen as an academic if I say like, maybe I want to go for my own startup at some point. But no, like, I mean, many PIs love that. And quite frankly, you can do great research in industry too, with like more money to do your research for, actually. So just be open and don't be shy.
I love that. I think don't be shy could be a theme of today's webinar when it comes to networking or even kind of putting your foot out in the door and getting that. So I really appreciate that. So we've reached the end of our time, sadly. So I just want to give another huge thank you to Daniel and Melanie for joining us today. This has been fantastic. I have a notebook full of notes. And I want to encourage everybody to continue to keep an eye out for what the US HUPO ECR is working on. You can follow US HUPO on Twitter or find our ECR page on the US HUPO's website to see the events that we have coming up soon. So thank you again so much, both of you, for your time today.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.